the weekly live stream. And today we've got a special topic, a little special day here on Seeking Excellence. Welcome to all the new local subscribers, the local members who have joined over the last few days. Greatly appreciated. I know many of you heard my announcement on Monday that we might be ending the Seeking Excellence podcast if we're not able to get to 100 supporters. We just crossed 50, which is really exciting. And I'll give more of an update on that on this coming Monday's podcast. But today we're going to be talking about Mr. Butker. So Harrison has been in the news for for getting a little dicey, if you will, at the Benedictine College commencement. Now, my family and I, we were really blessed that we were actually there at the commencement, which was really exciting. And so, just to share this with you, we got to be there, which was really cool. We had a great time. This is my second time meeting Harrison in person, and I've got to know him a little bit, slightly more personally through some other things. And hope to be doing. Hope to get him to know him more. You know, every interaction I've had with him has been very positive. I know people who have had more time with him, some people who have spent a lot of time with him, and I've had really positive experiences with him, and would love for other people to get to know him. I think when you get to see him and interact with him in person, you get to really see his heart, see his joy, and see his love for the Lord, and all of that. And so we had a great time at the Benedictine Commencement. For those who don't know, all three of my in-laws' kids went to Benedictine, including my wife. So she was the first to graduate from there in 2019. And then her two younger siblings graduated, and her youngest brother graduated on Saturday, which is why we were there. Now, I also worked at Benedictine College for one school year in 2020 to 2021 as a resident director, and have a very high opinion of the college. I think very highly of it. As a conservative Catholic man, I think that it's beautiful to see an institution that, in spite of all the pushback and difficulty of being conservatively Catholic, you can really appreciate the fact that they are willing to do what they do, willing to stand up for what we believe in, willing to embrace our faith. All of that is really awesome. And so I'm very grateful for the things that they do in that regard. Now, I want to give some context because I was there present for the speech. I listened to it for a second time today. And so I've had many conversations with friends who have seen it, friends who knew that I was there, friends that know that I'm a Butker fan. And so I've seen a lot of the context and the pushback and the anger on social media of people that are sharing their opinions on the matter. And so it's been a lot. The YouTube video, last time I checked here, let's see, has 293,000 views on the Benedictine College YouTube channel. For context, they have 3,000 subscribers on that YouTube channel. So that's a lot of views compared to what they're normally used to getting. Now, overall, so what I'm going to do basically in this video is I'm going to give you kind of overall thoughts, and then I'll give you some initial thoughts that I had walking away from commencement on Saturday. And so kind of just the initial feedback from everybody that was there. And then I'll give some second view thoughts. So I rewatched it today, and I'll share some of my thoughts that I had and some of the ways that my mind has changed on what I originally thought. Some maybe positive to negative, negative to positive. And then I want to play some clips and talk through some of the main points of the speech itself. And so, as you can see, if you've watched the video, if you've seen the video on YouTube, you know that there was a huge standing ovation at the end. And so people that were there generally were very accepting and embracing of his words that day. I think when you're walking in the building anywhere in Kansas and you play for the Kansas City Chiefs, you have a leg up, let's say, on winning over the crowd. Makes it a little bit easier. Knowing that he was conservative Catholic, speaking to a mostly conservative Catholic audience, he also had a leg up in that way too. So I think that was really good. And the original reaction of the crowd was very positive. I mean, you had some professors, some families who didn't stand. Naturally, there's going to be people in the crowd. In any crowd of a couple thousand people in the United States of America, you're not going to have all the people agree with everything that he said. I've heard a lot of people in my life. My wife, shared on her Instagram story some of her thoughts today, and most people say they agreed with 95% of it. Most of the people that I know, most of the conservative Catholics, let's say at least, you would never expect anybody who's a leftist or an atheist, a feminist, to agree with any of the things that he said. And we'll talk about the comments he made about women and all of that as well, of course. But you know that you're going to get vitriol and hate from the left if you say anything like what he said, right? And I just want to talk about, yeah, I think it was interesting to me, the timing of this, because our podcast on Monday that came out that Emily and I did was all about, it was all about the uh, stay-at-home moms, and we've gotten some negative feedback, and not a ton, but a little bit of pushback from people saying that we demonized women who work and all these things, and called it sinful to work. A lot of things which we didn't say. And so I, on a very small scale, get to experience what Harrison is experiencing on a very large scale, which is people taking your message and your words and basically just manipulating them, saying something totally different than what you actually said. And yeah, I know that that can be very frustrating for me on a very small level. So I can't imagine thousands and thousands of people doing that on a large scale is a positive experience. And so I think regardless, it's good to pray for Harrison during this time. If you're a faithful Catholic and you care about some of these values, and it's good to be willing to be prayerful and to think about them in this time. And so, yeah, you've got People news articles about Harrison's wife. You've got USA Today saying Harrison Butker commencement speech represents an ugly fringe. Gets major backlash after dissing Taylor Swift. I don't know how he dissed Taylor Swift. Oh man. Chiefs kicker says Pride Month is an example of deadly sin, which it is, objectively speaking. It's actually a combination of two, of lust and pride. So just looking at these different headlines as I just searched Butker, just the word Butker on Google, why the speech by Kansas City Chiefs kicker was embraced at Benedictine College. Chiefs kicker Harrison Butker says a woman should be a homemaker. So just interesting thing. So it's always interesting to me when they just misquote your words, right? They like say there's different things saying that Butker says women should just get back in the kitchen or whatever, and really interesting that that's the interpretation that people took away from what he said. But I think the first thing, just kind of get into my initial thoughts, initial reaction. When I stood in the back for most of it because it was Emily's brother's graduation, as I mentioned. And so to me, it was like, okay, she, is much more locked in on this than I am. And this is kind of her day. It's her family, And so I took Jordan, our 1-year-old son, and we stood in the back. Right at the beginning of the commencement speech, Jordan started. He was kind of ready to crawl around and be done. So I took him to the back, and we were just standing back there, and I listened to the full thing. Of course, I didn't want to miss it. So I'm listening to it, and the first thing that just impressed me with it is just the same thing that I have with people. I work for Hallow, and so my first reaction of when people give negative criticisms of Mark Wahlberg, we get this sometimes where people will like negatively, like, oh, Mark Wahlberg's passed and this and that, and I just remind people that the courage that it takes for Mark Wahlberg to be bold and open about his faith is truly remarkable. We greatly underappreciate how difficult it is for somebody like that to be willing to talk about their faith openly. It's unreal. I mean, it just the pushback, the temptations, even just the temptations to not go to church every Sunday, right? The temptations to adultery and just all the things that you could imagine would tempt somebody from living a Catholic lifestyle. He's had all of them, and he still chooses to pursue a relationship with God, chooses to go to mass, chooses to do a lot of free promotions for a Catholic prayer meditation app. And that's not nothing. And I think we overlook that a lot of times when it comes to celebrities, because we're quick to criticize them when they don't speak up, when they don't say things that we want to. We're quick to criticize them, and a lot of times rightfully so, when they bow down to the progressive church, to the woke culture. But when they do the right thing, when they are courageous, a lot of times we can be pretty soft about that, and we're not as encouraging or supportive of what they're doing. And so, all of that is really important. And so it's important for us. We have to recognize that. And so the courage that it took for him to get up there and say these things, knowing that it would be public, knowing or being able to at least somewhat anticipate this negativity and this hate that he would get on the other side of it, made it really impressive for me. My other initial thoughts. So my initial constructive criticism, my constructive feedback was that walking away from it the first time, I didn't feel like it was the best commencement speech. I thought that at like the Napa Institute or like a Catholic vote conference, if there were to be such a thing, um, that it's something like that, maybe like the Good News Conference or something, like some of these other like conservative Catholic conferences. I thought something like that, it would have been one of the best speeches I've ever heard. Hits on a lot of topics, a lot of different things that I really appreciate, that I really promote in my own personal life. Not all of it that I agree with. I would say I'm somewhere in that 95% range of things that I agree with, and I'll talk about what I disagreed with. But when I first walked away, and mind you, this is my first walking away after hearing it, it didn't feel as encouraging or directed towards the graduates as it did to seem a speech that you would just give to the world, sharing your opinions and what you believe about life. Those can be good things, and I think there's a place for that. To me, it just felt like it was off being at a commencement speech at a graduation. Just to kind of mix my thoughts here, I didn't feel as strongly about that the second time that I watched it, but I also don't know how much I'm swayed watching it a second time in my office alone, thinking that I'm just watching a talk or a speech versus knowing that I was there, the theme of graduation, the caps and gowns. In that moment, it felt to me like it wasn't as directed towards them as it could have been, as practical and encouraging and inspiring, and even using some of his own stories would have been interesting to hear about how he, battles woke culture in the NFL, how he is around this sinful and, basically Sodom and Gomorrah being in the NFL with all these guys who don't share our faith, who don't share our values. Hearing more stories about how he manages that, how he lives that out would have been really interesting, or even just a story or an example there, and encouraging people to go out into the world, which is a big part of Benedictine College, that we ought to go out into the world and we're going to transform culture in America by being authentically Catholic, by being influential, by being successful in society, and making the biggest impact that we can possibly make. To me, I thought that was would have been a good opportunity for that. Um, but I felt like it was I felt like he hit on it, especially in the latter half of the speech, even going back through some of the timestamps and stuff, watching it the second time. Um, and I feel like the first half was really kind of setting a lot of context for how kind of bad things are and just kind of the mess that we're in, which I think, especially there, I think most people know. And so I think that's why more of it could be on that kind of practical, encouraging, and inspirational side. Um, I do think that it got to that point, and I think when he got to the point, especially being emotional about his wife, talking about our vocations, talking about embracing masculinity, going out into the world, and following what the path that God has laid out for you, following God's desire for us to have good Catholic people who share our faith and values as our friends, the iron sharpens iron part, which we'll get to. I thought that was all really good. And so to me, it felt the second time that I watched it like it was more practical and more directed towards them. But I don't know. I can't replicate the first time that I heard it, which was albeit holding a baby in the back of a hot room at the actual graduation. Um, yeah. Other things was just I thought, especially the first time that I heard it, this is another one that I don't know if I'm being biased in this kind of change. At least it felt softened to me. I don't know if I'm being defensive because I believe in his position that um, a woman's vocation to her family is more important than any vocation she could have outside the home. And it took me a long time for that. If you listen to our podcast on Monday, you know that we talked about this, but it took me a long time to believe and understand that my most important work as a man was going to be in my house, in my family, in my vocation. I rejected that for a very long period of time, and thought for sure that what I would do outside the home would be more important than what I do in the home. And now I understand that that's not the case. And so for me, I think the timing of telling women that on their college graduation, I think you could debate it at least. if it's a good time to do it or not. I think it's a good reminder to those who are on the fence or already bought into that, and it can be encouraging to them. I don't know if it's winning a lot of people who are kind of distant or would object to that in the first place, right? And so for me, I think about a lot of these things from the perspective of like when I graduated from college, I was still a registered Democrat, right? So I was very, very bought into the Catholic faith. Didn't fully understand what all that meant yet as a convert, as a young convert, still figuring out my way in the world. But I wasn't progressive. I wouldn't say I was more of like an old school kind of liberal Democrat, but nevertheless, I was a Democrat. I never thought in a million years I would have a stay at home wife. I didn't know many stay at home moms. I knew a couple in my friend group growing up, but it wasn't a ton. And so for me, it was just kind of I just wonder how I would have felt, even as somebody who now is really bought into those things. Um, yeah, I think we can be tactful in the way that we express some of those things. And on first hearing, I did not feel that it was. Second time I listened to it, I didn't think it was actually egregious as I thought the first time. Still think the timing is kind of tough to slide that in. Um, and especially yeah, I think there's just more that we could say too about just affirming women just embracing their femininity, the beauty of femininity in the world, outside of the ways that it can impact a husband in his life and the things that he can go on to accomplish. I can definitely see how even some Orthodox Catholic women would be frustrated by that, especially those, I think, and I understand the groups that are struggling with infertility or that are struggling even to find their vocation to marriage. They haven't found anybody to marry yet. When that is emphasized, there can be two things can be true at once. That people can be overly sensitive about constantly wanting disclaimers, which is something I always fight against and hate in creating content and speaking and all of those things. That people constantly want you to be putting out these disclaimers saying, oh well, except for in this case and that case and all these different things and that kind of stuff. Like sometimes you just have to use common sense. But it can also be true that we can be more tactful in the way that we say things sometimes. And so I think you can debate. It's easy to Monday morning quarterback, as they say, and look back on something and say, yeah, this really could have gone better and that could have gone better. Nobody's ever going to write something that's perfect. And so that's also important to recognize as well. So I don't look at it as like that ruined it for me, but these are just to be genuine with you and be honest about the things that I thought as I watched it, as I saw it, just kind of some of the things that I was thinking. So uh, my second thoughts, I thought it was really an amazing speech and it addressed the graduates a little bit more than I remembered, just to kind of hit on those. Okay. And so now let's take a look. We'll listen to a little bit of it here together. Um, and yeah, just kind of give some thoughts as we go. Wait, I want to make sure that I had my sound share on as well. Oh yeah, I do. This I thought was one of his best points. He talks about how, you know, being Catholic in and of itself is not enough, which is obviously true. It's obviously true. Being Catholic in and of itself is not enough. He talks about how the Dr. Fauci who promoted COVID, Nancy Pelosi, all these people who are doing such damage to our society, sharing such degenerate ideas and horrible policies, they are Catholics. And it's really sad as for us as Catholics that these people are so open about their faith, quote unquote, their faith and embracing their Catholic faith, but promote everything that's counter to the Catholic faith and encourage actual assaults and criticisms and attacks on Catholic churches and on Catholics themselves. It's a great injustice, and truly, I mean, I'm a believer in the last four things, and I wouldn't want to be one of their defense attorneys on when it comes to the last judgment. Luckily, that's not a position I'll ever have to play, but they'll have to give a defense for the things that they've chosen to do, the things they've chosen to promote, the values and the degeneracy that they've embraced. And to be so brazen as President Biden was to make the sign of a cross at an abortion rally is, yeah, it's really diabolical. It reminds us that we should fast and pray for his soul because he's in a very, very dark and um, place that is very distant from the Lord, let's say. And so now let's jump ahead. Let's get into the viral part, right? So this is the part that, um, yeah, is going around on the reels and all of that. So let's take a look here. Oh, I went ahead. Sorry, this is my first time screen sharing on the live stream, so I'm a little sloppy. Important to note there. He says to the women, "Congratulations on this amazing accomplishment. You should be proud of all you have achieved in your young lives." That is not nothing. So I got a huge round of applause there, which I think was very well deserved. And he's basically hitting on here. And what he's sharing is that one, he's sharing from his own experience, right? He's sharing his wife's experience of what she's found to be most valuable and what she's found to be most fulfilling in her life and her life as a woman, right? That she's given up her dreams at career, her dreams at you name it, whatever she was hoping to do in her life before getting married. And yeah, I think it's beautiful that he's able to share that and he's able to give that context, um, and to give that example. Now, that might not be every woman's example. I have friends who tell me that their wives or sisters or whatever do not feel that they could ever be a stay at home mother. Now, I believe that's a combination of multiple things. I think that feminism has infiltrated and gotten deep inside the church and is so thoroughly, in our culture that you're going to have a lot of women who are just not tuned into that. They kind of, in a certain sense, like reject certain aspects of their femininity, and they've been masculinized in some respects. Now, are there some women, and we got pushed back from our podcast on Monday, who are called to the workforce, like Saint Gianna and Saint, um, uh, I think Saint Zelly, right, was also worked outside the home, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, that can be very possible as well. But we have to also realize that even, and this is something that I really tried to share in my podcast, um, is that even if, right, even if you are called to work outside the home, let's say, or uh, yeah, no matter what, your most important work that you're going to do in your life as a man or a woman is that of the family life, right? It's whatever you do with your family. And so that's you can't replace that. And so I think that a lot of people that are pushing back on that, he's not saying it's the only place you belong. He congratulated them on the accomplishment of graduating from college. My wife talks about how her formation in college was exceptional and very, very central to who she became as she's now a wife and mother. But still, you have to recognize, I think, from the Catholic perspective, this has been affirmed many, many times over. The most important thing we will do in our lives is even if you're just a spouse, even if you don't have children, if you're not able to have children, it's still your marriage is the most important thing that you're going to do. How you operate as a husband or wife, and it should still be the most important thing in your life. right? Even though I take my career very seriously, it's still not nearly as important as the work that I do as a husband and a father. And so let's jump ahead here to the part where we talk about the men. So this is around the 15-minute mark, and so I'm going to share again. Mm. Now, once again, we're getting into some territory that I very frequently condone or promote, right? You're having this conversation about how men need to embrace their masculinity, culture emasculation of men. I love all of that. And I think, especially talking about how you have men who do not embrace their gifts or the talents that God's given them a lot of times because they want to pursue something that they find more fun, let's say something that they think is more interesting. But it's really important that we recognize that men are called to lead, men are called to provide, and so sometimes you have to do something that doesn't make you as feelings, feel all soft and fuzzy inside, but does provide for your family, does make a positive impact in society. I think that's also really, really important. And so now let's get to some TLM stuff here, which I thought this was probably the part that I would say that I most strongly disagreed with. And again, I say it's the most strong, but it doesn't make it the that doesn't mean that I passionately disagree with it. I think to say that it's the most strong, I'm trying to think of an example of this, right? You could say that there's like something's always the most something, right? If you listed 100 things here and I had to rank them from I agree the most, I agree the least, like the Catholic faith being the absolute summit of the truth, and the pro-life comments are at the top, right? And probably tied with a lot of other things. And then this is towards, there's not that much discrepancy. And then this would be like third because most of the things are just tied for first because I agreed with them. But this one got into some territory that I think is definitely where the trads start to lose me. And so my thoughts there on the TLM stuff, I just feel like sometimes trads will talk about the TLM as though it's the way that they talk about it in the way that I think Catholics should talk about comparing mass to like a Protestant, or an evangelical church service, right? And so that's where I think you get into some problematic territory, is acting like everything he just said there. I would agree. Excuse me. I would agree if you were saying, I prioritize the mass, and I think you should move to a place where you can have Catholic mass. And I prioritize that over all else, even if the pastor's not as charismatic, even if the music's not as good, even if the church isn't as beautiful, even if they don't have free coffee, all of that stuff. That I would agree with if you were saying the mass compared to some other like just random Christian service. Where I don't think it's as Catholic based on councils and things that the church has taught now for the last 60 or so years, is that we can say that it's so essential that we should base our entire life around having that specific form of the mass. We should base our entire lives around. I don't think that it's wise for people to go on long vacations or to move somewhere where you can't go to mass, right? If there were like no Catholic churches in Texas, like no Catholics should live in Texas. That would be the easy solution. To say that we should limit our um as a college kid, as a young man who's trying to provide in this economy, where things are so expensive, that you should dictate your career based on where there's a traditional Latin mass and where there's not. You're going to have a hard time selling that to me, as I try to coach and encourage men to do these things, to provide and to pursue their career and pursue professional excellence. Now, I'd be interested to talk about that more with him, to go a little bit deeper into it, just to get his thoughts on some of it further. But I think generally speaking, that part for me was something that I was like, yeah, I'm definitely not fully bought into that. So, yeah, that just I think was just kind of an interesting thing. Um, awesome. So then last part here. So I want to take a look at this last bit of the speech. All right, so we are taking a look here for those just joining on Instagram. If you want to head over to YouTube or Rumble or Locals channel, I've been doing a little live stream reaction here to Harrison Butker's speech. And so we're going to listen to one last part here on on community and iron sharpening iron. This was actually potentially my favorite part of the speech. It was definitely one of my favorite parts of the speech. And so, like I said, I've been live on Locals now. This is about 30 minutes in. I've already talked about some of the response to women and all those other aspects of the speech. But if you're just joining on Instagram, we're going to talk about this one last little bit here. So, if you're dating somebody who doesn't even share your faith, how do you expect that person to help you to become a saint? Now, that I thought was a really interesting line. And just thinking about that, iron sharpening iron, for whatever reason, sitting in the back of this room, the back of the gym where the commencement speech was, again, it felt like it was 90 degrees. I'm holding Jordan, who's just literally a little heater. And we're sitting there listening to the speech. And for whatever reason, this was actually something that hit me the most in the speech, and why I say it was probably my favorite part, was that this was something I walked away and I was like, I need to utilize this going forward. I need to share this going forward. And the reason why it stuck out to me so much there is he's talking about dating and marrying. He's talking about making friends with somebody who shares your faith and shares your values. Now, what's interesting about that, you talk about iron sharpening iron. I was like, it's interesting that it's not that steel sharpens iron, or that rock sharpens iron, or that bronze sharpens iron, or that silver sharpens iron. You get what I'm saying? The phrase that we hear in Proverbs is that iron sharpens iron, right? Iron sharpens iron, which means the like thing sharpens the like thing. Doesn't mean you have to be exactly the same as the people in your life, but people who don't share your values, people who are your friends who don't share your faith, don't share your values, are totally different than you. Doesn't mean you can't be friends with those people, but you have to recognize that if you're trying to live out sainthood, if you're going to become a saint, I've often struggled with this and probably have a hotter take than some like to hear. I know our friends at West Coast Catholic got a lot of negative pushback for a reel that they had recently talking about marrying or dating somebody that's not Catholic. And I know that I have a somewhat strong opinion on this, but to me, it just really struck me when Harrison talked about that, when he talked about iron sharpens iron. So in order to be sharpened, you have to have people around you who are actually pursuing the same thing, right? If you're a football player and you're trying to be the best football player, the best basketball player, it helps to have other friends who are playing basketball, right? You can have friends that play other sports. You can still learn from their drive, their work ethic, etc. But the closer that they get to you, the more time you're spending with them, it helps to have the similar interests, the similar values, a similar pursuit as that person. And so I really appreciated that. And I'm surprised that that part hasn't gotten more negative feedback. The only other part that I forgot to mention that I haven't hit on in this live stream, if you're just joining us again on Instagram, we've been live streaming on YouTube, Locals, and Rumble for the last 35-ish, 36-ish minutes, talking about different parts of Butker's speech. So I'm just doing the tail end here on Instagram. But the other part that I thought was really interesting, and this is probably something I have a slightly hotter take on as well, is he was critical of what you might call Catholic. Sorry, Emily was calling me. What you might call Catholic birth control, which people call, which most of us refer to as natural family planning, is NFP. And yes, he said there's nothing natural about Catholic birth control, which is kind of a play on words because he's saying there's nothing natural about natural family planning, if you get that. And my thoughts there. Again, I think they packed a lot into one speech, right? Harrison packed a lot into one moment, one speech, and kind of hit on a lot of different things. Which that was another thing too that kind of felt like it bounced around in certain ways because it did hit on so many different topics. If you listen to like the first 2.5 minutes, he lists some of the issues and hit on so much in such a short period of time. But I think that the comments on NFP, to me, and this is a good kind of closing thing, is I thought that those comments were really showing that what to me was the theme of the talk was not so much the stay in your lane theme that he hit on and shared multiple times. The main theme of the talk to me was, if we're going to change the culture, if we're going to become saints, if we're going to go out there and be the greatest, be the best that we can be, we have to be radically open to God's will for our lives. We have to be radically open to God's will for our lives. And if we're not, we're going to have problems in our lives. And if we're not going to become saints. We're going to be limited in what we do. And so the NFP stuff for me, I had the conversation recently, with a Catholic school principal. And there was a bunch of people around, and she was sharing how, like, after they had one kid, she was like, I'm done having kids. And like, I think that's problematic, right? It doesn't mean that you have to have 12 kids. And I remember having debates even back. I remember an ex-girlfriend of mine, even back when I only wanted to have like 2 or 3 kids, like just talking with her about the Catholic position on birth control and just being like, yeah, I don't want to have 10 kids, but the underlying thing is that we have to be open to having as many kids as God wants us to have. And I also just recently had a conversation with a friend of mine who just recently graduated from college, went to a Protestant school. This person's a convert. And so she was talking about just having like brunch or hanging out with some of her girlfriends, many of whom are getting married and talking. They're Christians. And so they have been, practicing chastity, and now they're getting ready to get married. And they're talking about what birth control they're going to go on once they get married. And it's like, you guys are so open to God's will in every area of your life, except for how many children you have, except for being open to, how many lives God wants to bless you with. And we view life, especially those of us who are pro-life, conservative Christians, like we view life as the greatest of all gifts, right? The greatest thing that we can receive is the blessings of a child. And we have trust and faith in God in so many ways, right? That God's going to provide for us, that God's going to give us what we need to be good, not to thrive, not to be wealthy, but that God will give us what we need to survive and to thrive in the ways that he wants us to thrive, the ways that are most important, right? And to thrive in virtue, to thrive in goodness, to thrive in generosity and truth, beauty, and goodness. And so it is pretty mind-blowing to me. And this has been a big part of my ongoing conversion. There's several things in my conversion story that that continues to play out, right? As I continue to grow in my Catholic faith and in my belief and trust in God and my faithful or my belief in his faithfulness and his goodness, that I've understood more thoroughly over the years. And I got to be honest with you, the size of families is definitely one of them. It's definitely one of those things for me of just feeling like too many people, Catholics, Protestants, etc., are just so controlling on how many kids they want to have and when they want to have them. I talking to people that have been married for 4 or 5 years, and they're like, "Oh, we're just waiting to have kids," and it's like, okay, if that's what I just think that if you're getting married, you should get married with the idea that we're supposed to be open to life and we're going to be open to having children, because that's literally the church teaches one of the fundamental aspects of marriage is the procreation and upbringing of children. And so to just like to enter into it, but not want to enter into that aspect of it for years, to me doesn't make a ton of sense. I don't know. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. But I actually, the only time we really in our family, currently at least in our marriage, use NFP, we took the class, of course, because you have to get married in the church and most places. The only time we use it is really trying to get pregnant. We don't really use it to abstain. And we've only been married for 2 years, so I'm not trying to give you like, oh, look at us, we're 30 years in and have 10 kids if we don't use NFP. But I also think that there's like this goodness of certain families that I know, great Catholic families that have been open to life that only had 4 kids because they feel like God gave them the number of kids that they could handle. And I just feel like people who try to constantly control the timing and how many kids they have, they don't have that trust, that confidence in God that he will not overwhelm you, right? That God's not going to ruin your life. He's not going to give you something that you can't actually handle. So I think that's really important to just kind of recognize and embrace. So if you don't know, there is a there's a lot of things going around on Butker here. This was one of my favorites. This article that says, I thought this just to kind of finish with some humor. It says the harmful. Let's see if I can read this. This is so funny, man. This is so good. The harmful remarks made by Harrison Butker, kicker of the Kansas City Chiefs, during his commencement address at Benedictine College were unacceptable. His comments were sexist, homophobic, anti-trans, anti-abortion, and my favorite one, racist. Now, I was there, as I said. I've listened to it for a second time. I don't know. There was a lot of things in there. There was a lot of things in there that I would assume the left would say you would describe as all of those things. I am not remotely surprised to hear leftists call his speech sexist. I don't fully understand how it was homophobic, but I feel like that gets thrown around anywhere it can. Also, don't think I fully understand how it was anti-trans. Definitely understand how it was anti-abortion, because it was, and it should have been, and it always should be. But I truly, just the racism. I don't know what that one to be. I laughed pretty hard the first time I read that. I thought that was really fun. These comments reinforce harmful stereotypes that threaten social progress. They create a toxic environment that hinders our collective efforts towards equality. What they mean to say is equity, diversity, and inclusion in society. Yeah, it's DEI. The E is actually equity. They try to slip in equality there, which is a traditional value. We believe in equality. We don't believe in equity. And then it says, it's unacceptable for such a public figure to use their platform to foster harm rather than unity. Now, you can say all kinds of hateful things about all types of people, especially Catholics. He gets up. There was nothing hateful about what he said. You can disagree with it. I think that you can, we can debate, as I've done on this live stream for the last 45 minutes, giving my constructive feedback and my honest thoughts on what I thought about the speech. You can do all of that. But to say that, to sit in here in a world, and this is where I think, like, as Catholics, we have to be unified about this, is let's debate, let's discuss. Was it the right place to talk about, women's, this quote unquote women needing to be at home, stay-at-home mothers and stay-at-home wives? Was a college graduation the right place to talk about that? Is that really important? Kind of like we tried to talk about in our podcast this past week. Is that actually something that the church promotes and teaches and says should be prioritized? Is your primary vocation? Let's talk about it as Catholics and other people in the world. A lot of conservatives, especially Protestants, don't necessarily have this language of vocations and talking about, is the most important work you do in the home as a husband or a wife, as a mother or a father. Let's talk about these things. But as Catholics, we have to be willing to embrace the discomfort that we're going to have as a team when people go out there, when somebody goes out there and boldly states what the church teaches on things like life, on things like marriage, on things like our vocation. And I think we have to be just cautious when criticizing of how much of what triggers us is the same thing that triggers the left. And whenever I'm the same on the same side as them, I just want to evaluate. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but when you're triggered by something that triggers the left, it can be worth at least analyzing how what is causing this within my heart, right? I think the same thing with some of the feedback we've gotten from our podcast on Emily's decision to be a stay-at-home mom is I just truly think, and I've shared this many times before, many times publicly, that feminism has so deeply infiltrated the church, the minds, the hearts of young men and women in our world today that a lot of times things like this will trigger, even if it's not necessary. We can have debates again on time and place and all of that, but truly thinking about, was what he said true? Was it delivered well? Is another conversation debate we can have. What would you have changed about it? But the idea that we should never state bold truths, that we should never be outspoken about what we believe is not good. And we can recognize at least the courage that it takes to get up on stage, knowing all the hate and feedback and pushback that he was going to get. We can recognize that it was very courageous to get up there and do that. So I applaud Harrison Butker for the courage that it took to say these things. I think it's hilarious that this person called it racist. I think that is really, really funny. And so thank you to that person, Willard, I think, Willard Harris, whoever that is. Kind of funny. Their names are somewhat similar. And so, yeah, so those are kind of my thoughts. So the good, the bad, the ugly. I thought some of it was great. I thought other things could have been improved. I thought, my second time, I felt a little bit differently than I did the first time. So if you're on Instagram, if you want to see the full video here, it should be on YouTube. It's going to be on Locals and Rumble just in a moment. But we're going to shut things down here. That's it for today. Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't listened to our podcast this past Monday on stay-at-home mothers, whether it's a want or a need, you can check that out on YouTube or on Apple or Spotify podcasts as well. All right, my friends. Until next time, God bless you. Be your best. I'm out.